I wiped my floury hands on my apron and reached for the ringing phone. Laura's Bakery. How can I help you? Mom, it's me. Can you pick me up from soccer practice? Dad forgot again. I sighed, glancing at the clock. Sure, sweetie, I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I hung up, my assistant Megan poked her head around the kitchen door. Everything okay, Laura? Just Mark forgetting the kids again. Can you handle closing up? Megan nodded, and I grabbed my purse, heading out into the crisp autumn air. The drive to the soccer field was quick, and I spotted my daughter, Emma, sitting on the curb, her chin resting on her knees. Hey, kiddo, I called, rolling down the window. Hop in. Emma climbed into the car, her face a storm cloud. Dad never remembers anything anymore. I'm sure he's just busy with work, I said, not entirely believing it myself. How about we stop for ice cream on the way home? Emma's face brightened, and we chatted about her day as we drove to the local ice cream parlor. As we pulled into the driveway at home, I noticed Mark's car was already there. Why don't you go start your homework? I suggested to Emma. I'll bring your ice cream in. I found Mark in his home office, hunched over his drafting table. Hey, I said, leaning against the doorframe. You forgot Emma again. He looked up, genuine surprise on his face. Oh, God, I'm sorry, Laura. I got caught up in this new project and... It's fine, I interrupted, not wanting to hear another excuse. Just try to remember next time, okay? Mark nodded, and I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A small, ornate box sat on the edge of his desk, one I'd never seen before. What's that? I asked, pointing. Mark's eyes widened slightly. Oh, just some old keepsakes. Found them when I was cleaning out the attic last weekend. I reached for the box, but Mark's hand shot out, stopping me. It's nothing interesting, really. Just some old photos and stuff. His reaction piqued my curiosity, but I let it go. Okay, I'm going to check on Emma. That night, after the kids were in bed, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling about that box. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Finally, I slipped out of bed and padded down to Mark's office. The box was still there, tempting me. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Inside were a few old photos, ticket stubs, and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, my heart racing. My dearest Mark, it began. I know we said goodbye, but I can't stop thinking about you. What we had was special, and I'm not ready to let it go. Please meet me at our spot. We need to talk. All my love, Scarlett. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking. Scarlett? Who was Scarlett? And why was Mark keeping a love letter from her? The sound of footsteps made me jump. I quickly folded the letter and put it back in the box, closing it just as Mark appeared in the doorway. Laura, what are you doing up? I forced a smile. Just getting some water. Couldn't sleep. As I brushed past him, my mind was reeling. Who was this Scarlett, and what did she mean to Mark? And more importantly, why had he kept this letter hidden all these years? I climbed back into bed, my thoughts a whirlwind. One thing was certain. Our peaceful life was about to change, and I had a feeling it wouldn't be for the better. I couldn't shake the image of that letter from my mind as I pulled into Henry and Karen's driveway. The familiar scent of Karen's roses wafted through the air as I stepped out of the car, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. Karen answered the door, her face lighting up. Laura, what a lovely surprise. Come in, dear. I followed her into the living room, where Henry was reading the newspaper. He looked up, his bushy eyebrows raising. Laura, is everything all right? I'm not sure, I admitted, sinking into an armchair. I need to ask you both something, and I need you to be honest with me. Karen and Henry exchanged a glance. Of course, dear, Karen said, sitting down next to her husband. What is it? I took a deep breath. Who's Scarlett? The silence that followed was deafening. Henry's face paled, and Karen's hand flew to her mouth. Where did you hear that name? Henry asked, his voice gruff. I found a letter, I said, my heart pounding. In Mark's things. From her. Karen reached out, patting my hand. Oh, Laura, that was so long ago. We thought it was all in the past. What was in the past? I pressed. Who is she? Henry sighed, setting down his paper. Scarlett was Mark's high school sweetheart. They were inseparable for years. We all thought they'd end up married. What happened? I asked, dreading the answer. She disappeared, Karen said softly. Right after graduation. No note, no explanation. Just gone. I felt a chill run down my spine. And Mark? He was devastated, Henry said. Spent months looking for her. It nearly broke him. Karen nodded. We were so worried. But then he met you and, well, we thought he'd finally moved on. My mind was reeling. Why didn't anyone ever tell me about her? Mark asked us not to, Henry said. Said it was in the past and he wanted to focus on his future with you. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, but he kept her letter, all these years. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Laura, I'm sure it doesn't mean anything. Mark loves you. Does he? I asked, more to myself than to them. If he loved me, why would he keep secrets? Henry stood, placing a hand on my shoulder. People are complicated, Laura. Sometimes we hold on to things we shouldn't, even when we've moved on. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I turned to leave, Karen called out. Laura, wait, there's something else you should know. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. What is it? Karen hesitated, looking at Henry. He nodded, and she continued. About a year before you and Mark met, there were rumors that Scarlett had been seen back in town. My breath caught in my throat. And nothing, Henry said. If she was here, she didn't stay long. Mark never mentioned seeing her. I left their house with more questions than answers, my mind spinning. As I pulled into my own driveway, I saw Mark's car. He was home early. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the house. Mark was in the kitchen, making coffee. Hey, he said, smiling. You're home early. Everything okay? I looked at him, really looked at him, searching for any sign of the man who had been so devastated by Scarlett's disappearance. All I saw was my husband, the father of my children. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. About Scarlett. The coffee mug slipped from Mark's grasp, shattering on the floor. In that moment, I knew. Whatever Mark's relationship with Scarlett had been, it was far from over. The shattered mug lay forgotten at our feet as Mark's face drained of color. Laura, I can explain, he stammered. Then explain, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Explain why you've kept a love letter from your high school sweetheart hidden all these years. Mark ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd always found endearing. Now it just made me angry. It's not what you think, Scarlett. She's part of my past, that's all. A past you never told me about, I countered. A past your parents say nearly broke you. His eyes widened. You talked to my parents? I had to, I snapped, since my husband wasn't being honest with me. Mark sighed, sinking into a kitchen chair. I'm sorry, Laura. I should have told you about Scarlett years ago, but it was painful, and I thought it was over. Is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Of course it is. You're my wife, Laura. I love you. I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. Then why keep the letter? Mark hesitated, and in that moment, I knew there was more. Mark, I said, my voice hardening, what aren't you telling me? He stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen. About a year before we met, Scarlett came back to town. My heart sank. Your mother mentioned rumors, but she said you never saw her. Mark's face contorted with guilt. I lied to them. I did see her. The room seemed to spin. I gripped the counter for support. And nothing happened, he said quickly. We talked. She apologized for leaving, but I was still angry, still hurt. I told her I never wanted to see her again. But you kept her letter, I said, the pieces slowly falling into place. You kept it all this time. Mark reached for me, but I stepped back. Laura, please. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a reminder of a different time in my life. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. No, Mark, it's more than that. You've been holding on to her all these years, even if you didn't realize it. His face crumpled. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice breaking. And now I don't know if I can trust you. I turned to leave, but Mark's next words stopped me cold. There's something else. I slowly faced him, dread pooling in my stomach. What? Mark's eyes were filled with tears. When Scarlett came back, she wasn't alone. My breath caught in my throat. What do you mean? She had a baby with her, Mark said, his voice barely audible. A little boy. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Are you saying? Mark nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know for sure, but the timing fits, and he looked so much like me. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling. You have a son? With Scarlett? I don't know, Mark said, reaching for me again. I swear, Laura, I never saw them again after that day. I didn't want to know. But I was beyond hearing his explanations. My entire world had just shattered, and I couldn't breathe. Without a word, I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house, ignoring Mark's calls behind me. As I drove aimlessly through town, tears blurring my vision, one thought kept repeating in my mind. My husband might have another family. A family he'd kept secret for over 20 years. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. I needed answers, and I knew there was only one person who could give them to me. With trembling fingers, I searched online for Scarlett in our town. And there she was. Scarlett Anderson, owner of a local art gallery. Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed in the address and started the car. It was time to meet the woman who had haunted my marriage for far too long. My heart pounded as I stood outside Scarlett's art gallery. The closed sign hung in the window, but I could see movement inside. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. A woman with long auburn hair opened the door, her green eyes widening in surprise. "I'm sorry, we're closed." "Are you Scarlett?" I interrupted, my voice shaking. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I am. And you are?" "Laura," I said, watching her face carefully. Mark's wife." The color drained from Scarlett's face. She stepped back, allowing me inside. "I think we need to talk." The gallery was filled with vibrant paintings, but I barely noticed them as I followed Scarlett to a small office in the back. She gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing, too agitated to be still. "I assume Mark told you about me," Scarlett said softly. I laughed bitterly. "No, actually. I found your letter, the one you wrote him years ago." Scarlett's eyes widened. "He kept that, after all this time?" "Apparently," I said, my anger rising. "What I want to know is why you came back, why you showed up with a baby and turned Mark's life upside down." Scarlett flinched. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was young and scared when I left. When I came back, I thought Mark deserved to know the truth." "And what truth is that?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. Before Scarlett could respond, the office door opened. A young man walked in, his features so familiar it took my breath away. He was the spitting image of Mark at that age. "Mom?" he said, looking between us with confusion. "Is everything okay?" Scarlett's face paled further. "Ashton, honey, could you give us a minute?" But I couldn't take my eyes off him. "You're Mark's son," I whispered. Ashton's eyes widened. "What? Mom, what's she talking about?" Scarlett stood, placing a hand on Ashton's arm. "Ash, this is Laura. She's Mark's wife." The room spun as I watched understanding dawn on Ashton's face. He looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mark, the man you told me about? He's my father?" Scarlett nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ash. I never meant for you to find out like this." I stumbled backwards, gripping the edge of a desk for support. This was real. Mark had a son, a grown son he'd never known. "How could you keep this from him?" I asked Scarlett, my voice breaking. "From both of them." Scarlett's face crumpled. "I tried to tell Mark when I came back, but he was so angry, so hurt. He said he never wanted to see me again. I couldn't force him to be a father if he didn't want to be." Ashton's face hardened. "So you lied to me my whole life instead?" "I thought I was protecting you," Scarlett said, reaching for him, but Ashton stepped back. "I need some air," he muttered, brushing past me and out of the office. I watched him go, my heart aching for this young man whose world had just been shattered. Then I turned back to Scarlett. "Does Mark know?" I asked. "Does he know for certain that Ashton is his son?" Scarlett shook her head. "I never told him explicitly, but I think he must have suspected." The weight of everything crashed down on me, my marriage, my life, everything I thought I knew had been built on lies and secrets. "I can't do this," I said, more to myself than to Scarlett. "I can't pretend this isn't happening." Scarlett stepped towards me, her face etched with guilt. "Laura, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not you or Ashton." But her words barely registered, piecing together a plan. I knew what I had to do. "Mark's birthday is next week," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "There's going to be a party. I think you and Ashton should come." Scarlett's eyes widened in shock. "What, Laura, I don't think that's a good idea." "No," I cut her off. "It's time for the truth to come out. All of it. No more secrets, no more lies." As I walked out of the gallery, leaving a stunned Scarlett behind, I felt a strange sense of calm. The worst had happened, and I had survived. Now it was time to take control of my life again. And it would start with Mark's birthday party. I sat across from Hazel in her law office, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The events of the past few days tumbled out of me in a rush, leaving me breathless and on the verge of tears. Hazel leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. Laura, I'm so sorry you're going through this. It's a lot to process. I laughed bitterly. That's an understatement. My whole life feels like a lie. Have you talked to Mark since you found out about Ashton? Hazel asked gently. I shook my head. I've been staying at my sister's. I can't face him right now. Hazel nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. And what about the birthday party? Are you still planning to go through with it? I have to, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I can't keep living like this, pretending everything's fine when it's not. I need the truth to come out. Are you sure that's wise? Hazel cautioned. Exposing everything at a public event could have serious consequences. I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. What about the consequences I'm already facing? The lies, the betrayal? I can't just sweep it under the rug. Hazel sighed, leaning forward. Laura, as your friend, I understand your pain, but as a lawyer, I have to advise you to think carefully about your next steps. If you're considering divorce. Divorce. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even allowed myself to think that far ahead. It's a possibility you need to consider, Hazel said gently, and if that's the case, exposing Mark publicly could complicate legal proceedings. I stood up, pacing the office. So what am I supposed to do? Just pretend I don't know about his secret son? Act like my marriage isn't falling apart? Hazel stood, placing a comforting hand on my arm. No, of course not. But there might be a better way to handle this, one that protects you and your children. I froze. Oh God, the kids. How am I going to tell them about all this? One step at a time, Hazel soothed. First, I think you need to have an honest conversation with Mark, away from the party, away from Scarlett and Ashton. Just the two of you. I shook my head, tears spilling over. I don't know if I can face him alone. I'm so angry, Hazel, and hurt. What if I say something I can't take back? That's why I'm here, Hazel said, squeezing my arm. If you want, I can be present as a mediator, to keep things civil and protect your interests. I considered her words, my mind racing. The thought of confronting Mark was terrifying, but the alternative, continuing to live in this limbo of secrets and lies, was unbearable. Okay, I said finally. I'll talk to him, but I'm not backing down on the party. Scarlett and Ashton deserve to know the truth, too. Hazel nodded, a hint of worry in her eyes. Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't do anything rash. As I left Hazel's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Please come home. We need to talk. My heart raced as I typed out a reply. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Bring the truth this time. I drove home in a daze, my mind whirling with possibilities. What would happen tomorrow? Could my marriage survive this? And what about Ashton, the son Mark never knew he had? As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a figure sitting on the front steps. It was Ashton. He stood as I approached, his face a mirror of Mark's at that age. Mrs. Walker, I'm sorry to show up like this, but I need to know the truth about everything. I looked into his eyes, Mark's eyes, and made a decision. The time for secrets was over. Come inside, Ashton, I said, unlocking the door. I think we both deserve some answers. The day of Mark's birthday party arrived, and my stomach churned with a mix of dread and determination. I'd spent the past week in a haze of anger and confusion, avoiding Mark's calls and throwing myself into party preparations. Now, as I arranged the last of the decorations, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The doorbell rang, and I froze. It was too early for guests. My heart pounding, I opened the door to find Scarlett standing there, looking as nervous as I felt. Laura, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if I should come, but I think we need to talk before everyone else arrives. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. As she passed, I caught a whiff of her perfume, the same scent that had lingered on that old love letter. My fists clenched involuntarily. Where's Ashton? I asked, leading her to the kitchen. Scarlett's eyes widened. He's coming later. I wanted to speak with you alone first. I turned to face her, crossing my arms. What could you possibly have to say to me? She took a deep breath. I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. When I came back all those years ago, I truly believed Mark deserved to know about Ashton, but when he reacted so angrily, I thought it was best to keep my distance. And now, I challenged, why come back into our lives now? Scarlett's eyes filled with tears. Ashton started asking questions. About his father, about his past. I couldn't keep lying to him, and then when you showed up at the gallery, I realized it was time for the truth to come out. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Mark's voice called out, "Laura, are you here?" Scarlett and I froze, staring at each other in panic. Footsteps approached the kitchen, and then Mark appeared in the doorway. His eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. "Scarlett?" he gasped. "What are you doing here?" I watched as a myriad of emotions flashed across Mark's face. Shock, confusion, and something else. Something that looked dangerously like longing. "I invited her," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And Ashton, too. I thought it was time we all had an honest conversation." Mark's face paled. "Ashton? He's coming here?" Scarlett nodded, her eyes never leaving Mark's face. "He wants to meet you, Mark. He deserves to know his father." The word father hung in the air between us, heavy with 2 decades of secrets and lies. I watched as Mark stumbled backwards, gripping the doorframe for support. "Laura," he said, his voice breaking. "I can explain. I never meant to." "Save it," I cut him off. "I don't want to hear any more lies. Tonight we're going to tell everyone the truth. All of it." Mark's eyes darted between Scarlett and me, panic evident on his face. "You can't be serious. What about the kids? What about our family?" "Our family?" I laughed bitterly. "Our family has been built on lies, Mark. It's time for that to end." Just then the doorbell rang again. The first guests were arriving. Mark looked at me pleadingly, but I turned away, heading for the door. "Laura, wait," Scarlett called out. I paused, looking back at her. "Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." I met her gaze, then Mark's. In that moment, I saw the full weight of their shared history, the secrets they'd kept, and the lives they'd changed. And I knew, with absolute certainty, what I had to do. "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. "It's time for the truth, no matter the cost." As I opened the door to greet our guests, I could feel the tension radiating from the kitchen. The stage was set, the players were in place, and in just a few short hours everything would change. Let the party begin. The party was in full swing, but I felt like I was moving through a fog. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Mark stood across the room, his eyes darting nervously between me, Scarlett, and the door. I watched as Ashton arrived, his resemblance to Mark even more striking in the warm light of our living room. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd as people noticed the uncanny similarity. "Laura?" Hazel appeared at my elbow, her voice low and urgent. "Are you sure about this? It's not too late to handle this privately." I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "No, Hazel. No more secrets. No more lies." Taking a deep breath, I clinked my glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Mark's birthday," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "But before we continue, there's something you all need to know." Mark stepped forward, panic etched on his face. "Laura, please." "No, Mark," I cut him off. "It's time for the truth." I turned back to the crowd, my gaze finding Scarlett and Ashton. "Many of you may have noticed a new face here tonight. This is Ashton, and he has a very special connection to our family." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the room. I saw Henry and Karen exchange worried glances. "Ashton," I continued, "is Mark's son. A son he never knew he had, because his mother, Scarlett, left town before telling Mark she was pregnant." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. I watched as shock, disbelief, and dawning understanding played across the faces of our friends and family. Mark stepped forward, his face ashen. "Laura, I can explain." "Can you?" I challenged, my voice rising. "Can you explain why you kept Scarlett's letter all these years? Why you never told me about her, or about the possibility that you had a child out there?" Scarlett moved to stand beside Ashton, who looked shell-shocked. "I never meant for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was protecting everyone by staying away." "Protecting us?" I laughed bitterly. "You've torn our lives apart." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, the judgment, the pity, but I wasn't done. "For years," I continued, my voice breaking, "I thought I knew who my husband was. I thought we had built a life together based on trust and honesty, but it was all a lie." Mark reached for me, his eyes pleading. "Laura, please, I love you. I never meant to hurt you. I stepped back out of his reach. If you loved me, you would have told me the truth. You would have given me the chance to understand, to forgive. Ashton spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to know where I came from. My heart broke for him, for the innocent victim in all of this. I know, Ashton, and you deserve the truth, just like the rest of us. I turned back to the stunned crowd. I'm sorry to ruin the party, but I couldn't keep living this lie. Mark and Scarlett may have started this, but I'm ending it, here and now. With shaking hands, I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the table. The soft clink seemed to echo in the silent room. Happy birthday, Mark, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I hoped the truth was worth it. As I turned to leave, the room erupted into chaos. I could hear Mark calling my name, Scarlett's sobs, and the shocked exclamations of our guests. But I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cool night air, feeling both utterly broken and strangely free. The truth was out, the secrets exposed. Now I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ashes of the lies that had consumed it. The weeks following Mark's birthday party were a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and endless conversations with Hazel about divorce proceedings. I threw myself into my work at the bakery, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of kneading dough and decorating cakes. One quiet afternoon, as I was closing up shop, the bell above the door chimed. I looked up to see Ashton standing there, looking uncertain. Mrs. Walker, Laura, he began. I hope it's okay that I'm here. I wanted to talk to you. I nodded, gesturing for him to sit at one of the small tables. Of course, Ashton. What's on your mind? He fidgeted with a napkin, his eyes, so like Mark's, filled with a mix of emotions. I wanted to apologize for everything that's happened. I never meant to cause so much pain. My heart ached for this young man, caught in the middle of a mess he didn't create. Ashton, none of this is your fault. You have nothing to apologize for. He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I always wondered about my father, but I never imagined finding him would destroy a family. I reached out, covering his hand with mine. You didn't destroy anything, Ashton. The lies and secrets did that long before you came into the picture. We talked for hours about his life growing up, about Scarlett, about Mark. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the bakery floor, I felt something shift inside me. A weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying began to lift. The next day, I met with Mark at Hazel's office to finalize our separation agreement. As we sat across from each other, the man I'd loved for so many years looked older, worn down by the weight of his secrets. Laura, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I know I've hurt you beyond forgiveness, but I want you to know that I truly do love you. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a wave of emotions wash over me, anger, sadness, and surprisingly, a glimmer of understanding. I believe you, Mark, I said softly, but love isn't enough when there's no trust. We can't go back to what we were. He nodded, a single tear rolling down his cheek. I know, I just hope, someday, you can forgive me. As I signed the papers, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined for our story, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter. Weeks turned into months, and slowly I began to rebuild my life. The bakery thrived, and I found joy in simple pleasures, morning walks, coffee with Hazel, quiet evenings with a good book. And to my surprise, I found myself forming a tentative friendship with Ashton, who had become a regular at the bakery. One sunny afternoon, as I was experimenting with a new recipe, Ashton appeared at the counter, a shy smile on his face. I was wondering, he said, if you might need an extra pair of hands around here. I've always loved baking, and well, I thought it might be nice to get to know you better. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. I'd like that, Ashton. I'd like that very much. As we worked side by side, rolling out dough and sharing stories, I realized that life had a funny way of giving you exactly what you needed, even if it wasn't what you'd expected. The betrayal that had shattered my world had also opened doors I never knew existed. It had shown me my own strength, the depth of my friendships, and the capacity for forgiveness I didn't know I possessed. As I looked at Ashton, laughing as he dusted flour off his nose, I knew that while my marriage to Mark was over, my story was far from finished. There would be more chapters, more twists and turns, more joy and pain. But this time, I would write my own narrative on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where the story would lead.